Dorothy Pentreath, known as Dolly, was a speaker of the Cornish language. She is the most well-known of the last fluent native speakers of the Cornish language prior to its revival in 1904. Biography. Early life. Baptized on 16 May 1692, Pentreath was probably the second of the 6 children of fisherman Nicholas Pentreath and his second wife Joan Pentreath. She later claimed that she could not speak a word of English until the age of 20. Whether or not this is correct, Cornish was her first language. In old age, she remembered that as a child she had sold fish at Penzance in the Cornish language, which most local inhabitants then understood. She lived in the parish of Paul, next to Mousehole. Perhaps due to poverty, Pentreath never married, but in 1729 she gave birth to a son, John Pentreath, who lived until 1778. Pentreath is described as having been the old matriarch of the Cornish language. Dolly was a Cornish fishwife who tramped her fishy wares around Penworth and Penzance. At the latter place she gained the reputation of being the last native Cornish speaker, though she may not have been. Opinion is also divided about how much Cornish she could actually speak, though everyone agreed she could swear in Cornish. Later years. Death and legacy. In 1768, Daines Barrington searched Cornwall for speakers of the language and at Mousehole found Pentreath, then a fish seller said to be aged about 82, who could speak Cornish very fluently. Quote, in 1775 he published an account of her in the Society of Antiquaries journal Archaeologia in an article called On the Exploration of the Cornish Language. Barrington noted that the hut in which she lived was in a narrow lane, and that in 2 rather better cottages just opposite it he had found 2 other women, some 10 or 12 years younger than Pentreath, who could not speak Cornish readily, but who understood it. 5 years later, Pentreath was said to be 87 years old, and at the time her hut was poor and maintained mostly by the parish, and partly by fortune-telling and gabbling Cornish. In the last years of her life, Pentreath became a local celebrity for her knowledge of Cornish. Around 1777, she was painted by John Doppy, and in 1781 an engraving of her after Robert Scaddan was published. In 1797, a Mousehole fisherman told Richard Polwheel that William Bodner used to talk with her 4 hours together in Cornish, that their conversation was understood by scarcely anyone of the place, that both Dolly and himself could talk in English. Quote, her own account as recorded by Daines Barrington indicates she also spoke English. Dolly Pentreath has passed into legend for cursing people in a long stream of fierce Cornish whenever she became angry. Her death is seen as marking the death of Cornish as a community language. According to legend, her last words were, "Mini vid en Suzel Swarzno," but it is more likely that this was her customary response to being addressed in English. There are many tales about her. She was said often to curse people, including calling them Cronkenhagadu, an ugly black toad, and was even said to have been a witch. Numerous other stories have been attached to her, their accuracy unknown. She was at one time thought to have been identical with a Dorothy Jeffrey whose burial is recorded in the Paul Parish Register, but this has been doubted. Does accept the identification. Monument. Dolly Pentreath was buried at Paul, where in 1860 a monument in her honor was set into the churchyard wall of the Church of St. Paul Aurelian by Louis Lucien Bonaparte, a nephew of Napoleon, and by the vicar of Paul of the time. It reads, "Here lieth interred Dorothy Pentreath, who died in 1777, said to have been the last person who conversed in the ancient Cornish, the peculiar language of this country from the earliest records till it expired in the 18th century, in this parish of St. Paul. This stone is erected by the Prince Louis Bonaparte in union with the Rev. John Garrett, vicar of St. Paul, June 1860. Honour thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Exod. XX. 12. Gwra pethidatas harda mam, maldidai the obedans hyr warrantir nebanalith de juris des. Exod. XX. 12. Contradicting the monument, in 1882 Dr. Frederick Iago of Plymouth received a letter from Bernard Victor of Mousehole, who wrote, "She died Decr. 26, 1777, at the age of 102. At her funeral the undertaker was George Badcock, he being my grandfather. That is the reason I am still well informed, and the great chosen fisherman bearers to take her to her last resting place. There was not anything erected on the old lady's grave as a tablet to her memory. I know quite well the grave where her remains are deposited." Quote. In a later letter he went on to say that it was no surprise that Bonaparte and Garrett had mistaken both the date and the place of the grave. Dolly's actual resting place is 47 feet southeast, a point easterly from Prince L. Bonaparte's monument to her. It is not to be said that the monument is in its right place, because it was put there by the order of Prince L. Bonaparte, or by the Rev. John Garrett, the one a Frenchman and the other an Irishman. Quote. However, the erroneous idea that Pentreath had lived to be 102 is believed to originate in a Cornish language epitaph which had been written by December 1789 and published in 1806 by a man named Thomson. No burial of Dorothy Pentreath is recorded, but it has been argued that this appears in the parish register under the name of Dolly Jeffrey, which is suggested to be the surname of her son's father. This theory is accepted by the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. In 1887, the monument was moved to the site of her unmarked grave, and a skeleton was disinterred which was believed to be hers. But Jacques Helius, the Breton writer, has dedicated a poem to Dolly Pentreath. Last Cornish speaker. As with many other last native speakers, there is controversy over Pentreath's status. Her true claim to notability is not as the last speaker of the language, but rather as its last fluent native speaker. After her death, Barrington received a letter, written in Cornish and accompanied by an English translation, from a fisherman in Mousehole named William Bodner, stating that he knew of 5 people who could speak Cornish in that village alone. Barrington also speaks of a John Nancarrow from Marazion who was a native speaker and survived into the 1790s. There is one known traditional Cornish speaker, John Mann, who as a child in Boswednac, Zena, always conversed in Cornish with other children, and was alive at the age of 80 in 1914. He was the last known survivor of a number of traditional Cornish speakers of the 19th century, including Jacob Kerr of St Ives, Elizabeth Vingo of Higher Boswava, Madron, John Davy Jr. and Sr. of Boswednac, and Berryman, also of Boswednac. Matthew Wallace of St. Buryan certified in 1859 that his grandmother, Anne Wallace, who had died around 1844, had spoken Cornish well. He also stated that Jane Barney Coate, who had died about 1857, could speak Cornish too.